The fried egg orchid, although that's a terrible name, we can almost see how probably a Westerner came up with it, but let's rather stick with a name that comes from the area that they're from, Golden Bow. Much prettier name for such a beautiful orchid. These guys come from that Indochina region, and that name Indochina brings those ideas of exotic faraway destinations with amazing sounds, scents, and sights. And this is exactly what this embodies. It's got the most amazing, almost honey-like scent. And then, of course, these beautiful, beautiful yellow flowers that come in en masse, all at the same time. And you can almost imagine being on the Orient Express passing through forest-clad cliff faces with fountains of yellow bursting from the trees. So these guys' natural habitat is all the way from India through across into Myanmar, across Thailand, Cambodia, all the way through up into Yunnan province in China too. So they've got quite a broad distribution. And they're generally found at elevations, anything from about 400 meters above sea level to around 1,400. And coming from those tropical areas, as soon as you add a little bit of elevation, you know that they also are more than accustomed to getting a little bit of cool, instead of just having those searing tropical temperatures all year round. So these are quite easy to grow orchids, and as I said, with that broad distribution and with that elevation, it means that they can acclimatize to quite a few different situations. But invariably, their temperatures are warm during spring and summer, and then cool in winter, as would happen with most places. But in winter, because of those higher elevations that you're getting in those tropical areas, they can accept cool temperatures all the way down to around 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. But that doesn't mean that's what they like to have all the time. They're going to accept it, but if you give them cold temperatures like that for extended periods, then of course that's not what they're going to be used to, because they may get cooler temperatures in the evenings, but being from those tropical environments, during the daytime, their temperatures do rise back up again. So their temperatures during the day can be anywhere from around 24 all the way up to 28 degrees Celsius during those winter days, while still getting really cool evenings. Keep this in mind, because I'll bring this up a little bit later with regards to the flowering. These guys are epiphytic plants. They grow out on the limbs of trees and sometimes even on rocks, and generally in deciduous forests. So what's going to happen in wintertime is those forests, or the trees that they're in, will then start to lose all their leaves, and then these orchids are going to be exposed to more sun during the winter period than they are during that spring, summer, and even fall period. And what's also another clue about what sort of environment they come from if they're in deciduous forests, what it means is often deciduous forests lose their leaves because of a dry season. The trees will lose their leaves to help them able to maintain moisture more during an extended dry period. So that is generally hinting at saying that in wintertime, these guys are going to go through a dry period. They're going to get lots of rain during that spring, summer, and possibly even in that autumn period, and then they start drying up over winter. And now that the trees have lost all their leaves, there's going to be even more air movement and light on these plants, which is going to dry them out even further. And so this is always something to keep in mind when you are growing your Dendrobium chrysotoxum. Also, something to take into account is the fact that when those leaves drop off of those trees, it then allows dew to be able to fall on your orchid, because they're being held up high in the branches and it's going to be exposed to the dew. Whereas if the leaves had been there, the dew might not have happened or fallen on the orchid itself. So it's always something to take into account of when putting your orchid through a winter rest period and a dry period, is that we don't want those pseudobulbs to wrinkle and dry out, dehydrate too far. We're still going to want to mist or very light watering to our orchid during this period, just to ensure that we're not allowing those pseudobulbs to wrinkle too far. We don't want to put too much stress on the orchid, and as it would appear in nature, it doesn't want to do it there either. Just allowing for that light bit of moisture to come in from dew or fog that will then keep your plant hydrated. What these guys particularly do like is high humidity, especially during those growing seasons. They like humidity in the range of as high as 80 and 85%, because they do like lots and lots of water during this period. This is when they get majority of their rain, and the rain can last for long periods. So don't be shy with your watering over these periods, but understand that you do need good drainage for your orchids. These dendrobiums really do need to drain quickly. These do particularly well when grown in pots as opposed to on mounts, because on mounts you are going to have to water very frequently during those growing periods. So especially if your temperatures are warm, they're going to dry out very quickly, and you're going to have to be watering once, twice, perhaps 3 times a day, depending on your temperatures and your humidity levels. In a pot, you get away with a lot less stressful watering habits. But here, our pot is incredibly heavy because the majority of it is stone. Anything like stone or other inorganic medias such as lacquer, lava rock, charcoal. Remember, if you're using charcoal again, you need to add some extra weight into your pot, because although these are considered small orchids, they're really not that small. And they can get quite top heavy, as your pseudobulbs can grow to approximately 30 centimeters in length, and then with the leaves on top that point almost directly up, you're adding another 15 or 20 centimeters. So they're not as small as what some people like to make out. You'll notice also they're grown in relatively small pots for the size plants they are. This is just so that we don't get over accumulation of moisture in the pot. It allows for faster drainage, for that air movement to come through and dry out through the media so the roots don't rot. It isn't particularly because they want to be crammed into a small pot. It's got more to do with allowing for enough air movement right through the pot, and for that drainage to happen quickly and that drying, so that we're not holding moisture in the pot for extended periods. And I got sidetracked again. We were talking about the humidity levels of about 80 to 85% during that growing period, and then during that winter dryness is when the humidity levels drop, and through into just about the beginning of spring, it's during that flowering season that your humidity levels drop to around 60%. So this helps maintain a drier period for your orchid, because that's particularly what it's going to enjoy. But more than that, there's going to be a specific requirement to ensure that we're going to get this to flower properly. Also, these guys are light hungry. They love lots and lots and lots of light. In fact, a lot of them can be grown in full sun, as long as you're protecting them from a little bit of that summer heat. That midday summer heat is what they need to be protected, because we really don't want to burn those leaves, because they are long-lasting leaves. These leaves are going to be on the plant for several years, and we want to ensure that we keep as much of that leaf volume intact as possible, so that we can ensure enough photosynthesis for the plant to be able to produce such beautiful displays. That doesn't mean that these plants are only going to bloom on pseudobulbs that have leaves on them. They don't. They'll still bloom on pseudobulbs that have no leaves. In fact, each of these pseudobulbs can keep flowering over and over and over again for several years. And this just helps produce a spectacular display on your orchid. And talking about the leaves, these guys are actually fairly hardy plants. There's not too many things that like to attack them, not too many diseases that are involved around them either. You may get a little bit of fungal attack on the leaves occasionally. That's generally nothing too serious to be able to manage. You may get the odd scale here and there that, as long as you're catching early, you can get rid of. But otherwise, I find them incredibly tough, hardy plants that are generally resistant to a lot of the other orchid-related diseases. Of course, if you are overwatering, you are going to get rot in your roots, up through and into your pseudobulbs. So that's something you're obviously going to have to be aware of, but as long as you're managing your watering properly and you've got a proper, well-drained media with lots of aeration and good air movement, you're going to less likely have that problem. And if you are starting to lose a lot of leaf volume from your plant, initially it's not going to be too serious if you're losing a couple of leaves off the bottoms of your leaf volume of these pseudobulbs, because they do occasionally just go through old age and start to yellow, get spotty and die off. But as soon as you start losing more and more leaf volume too quickly, check your media that your roots aren't rotting, or check that you are not underwatering. Check that you're not getting dehydration of your pseudobulbs, which will then start causing the plant to lose its leaves as it tries to save moisture. And once you've lost all the leaf volume on your plant, it can take quite a while for it to then recover. Its new leaves are only going to grow off the new shoots that come off, those new pseudobulbs that are then grown, and it can take between 2 and 3 years for your plant to look like a healthy specimen again, and it may also take a while, or it will then take a while for it to start blooming properly again afterwards as well. And when it comes to feeding these guys, they like high nitrogen feed during that spring and summer season for them to really grow well. So feed them weekly. I'd feed every week. We use organic fertilizer with ours, and we feed them every week at a week concentration. And then we feed all the way through until about mid-autumn or fall, and then we stop feeding altogether, because these guys do go through an almost dormant period where they stop feeding and they're basically maturing their pseudobulbs to flower. Feeding at this point can become problematic, because if you are feeding at this point, you may be causing too many salts in your media, which dendrobiums do not like. If you're using alkaline water as well, water with too many high concentrations of alkaline salts in it, you could kill your plant altogether. Talking about pests, I nearly forgot, one of the biggest problems that you'll ever have with your Dendrobium chrysotoxum is possibly slugs and snails. Because your blooms do start smelling like honey, they produce that nectar scent or whatever it is from when the flower spikes almost just about start, and you'll often find, if you're not keeping an eye on them, they will either eat the whole flower spike as it's coming, or as the buds have got to this sort of point, you'll notice them start being eaten off. So always keep an eye out for slugs and snails on these guys. So we've been through temperatures, humidity, watering, media, light. Now let's get to the flowering. So these guys flower sort of end of winter, beginning of spring. As I've said already, they get a drier period during that winter. that almost dry, cool rest period, similar to what a Dendrobium noble is going to get. But there's going to be some distinct differences here. If we do keep these guys too cold as what we might be able to keep a Dendrobium noble for, we're going to find we might start losing those flower buds. Those flower buds are going to start falling off one by one until we have none left over. So why do we say cool rest period? What's going to be more important than the coolness, really, if you want to put it this way, is that change in temperatures between your day and night during that period. So they need about a 15 to 18 degrees Celsius temperature change or temperature fluctuation between your day and night to really help them produce those flower spikes. So yes, they can take those cold temperatures, especially during the evenings, but they do like to warm up somewhat during the days. So as long as you are able to give them that temperature fluctuation that they're going to need to produce flowers properly. And this is almost going to be one of the most important factors to get your Dendrobium to flower properly. But it's not only going to be that, it's going to be that high light intensity, especially during that winter period. You're going to have to give them longer daylight hours if you can, if you're not in a tropical region that has long days. If your winter sun goes down early, you're going to have to start adding artificial light to them because they really want high light during that winter period to help set those flowers properly. So how do we make sure we get all these flower spikes on these orchids? Well, for one, it's to ensure that we get those day-night fluctuations in temperatures over that winter and spring period, a cool, dry rest during that winter period, only for about a month or two. So you're withholding water almost completely with perhaps a light misting or fogging during that period just to ensure that the pseudobulbs don't dehydrate. We're ensuring to try and keep as much leaf volume on our plant as possible so that our plant is healthy and strong enough to be able to support the flowering. So we're making sure that we've got good drainage and aeration so that we're not having rotting roots, or we're making sure that we're giving enough water during that growing season so that our plants can grow properly without dehydrating, and ensuring that it gets enough light. Light is also very important, but did I say that already? If I didn't, I said it again. But other than all of that, these are really such easy growing plants and so rewarding. And also with flowering, never remove any of these old pseudobulbs until they have completely dried off, as they can all reflower at some point or another. In fact, these pseudobulbs can send off 2 or more flower spikes off each of the pseudobulbs. And as the plant ages, you'll end up with many, many flower spikes on the plant at the same time. One of the only shortfalls of these beautiful orchids is how short the flowering display is, because they tend to flower en masse and most of them open all at the same time, and you get a relatively short lasting flower display out of them. As the flowers last perhaps a week, you might be lucky to get 2 weeks out of them, but the joy of just seeing them in the first place is beyond words. So it doesn't matter how short it is, it really is magnificent and wonderful plants to own. Ed has posted up several Dendrobium related articles in that Buy Me a Coffee link there in the description box down below. Be sure to check that out and use that as one of your go-to resources. And if you have found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.